Daniel was already there. He stood when he saw her, gave her a small, grateful smile. He looked older than she remembered, not in years, but in his eyes. They ordered drinks, sat by the window. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he exhaled slowly. He said he had made a mistake years ago, one he had carried silently, a choice that changed his life and quietly affected others. He wasn't dramatic. He didn't raise his voice. That somehow made it heavier. He said he trusted her, because she listened, because she saw people, not just situations. She didn't interrupt. She let him speak. He told her about a letter he had never sent, a conversation he avoided, a truth he buried. The regret wasn't loud. It was steady. He said he was tired of pretending everything was fine, tired of smiling at family dinners. He asked her if she believed it was ever too late to fix something. She didn't answer right away. Outside, leaves moved along the sidewalk. People passed, unaware. She told him she believed honesty mattered, even when it scared people. He nodded, eyes shining slightly. Then he said something that caught her off guard. He said he needed her help to face someone from his past, someone connected to her husband's family, someone who deserved answers. Her heart skipped. She asked who. He hesitated, said he couldn't say yet, not until he was sure she would stand with him. She felt a pull between loyalty and compassion, between comfort and truth. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out an envelope. Worn, creased. He slid it across the table toward her. He said that letter explained everything. Who he was back then, why he stayed silent, and why he was afraid now. She didn't open it. Not yet. Her fingers rested on the edge. She looked at him and saw fear, not weakness. Fear of losing what little peace he had left. He asked her one last thing, if she could read it, and tell him honestly whether he should finally speak. The cafe felt quieter, the air heavier. She nodded, because something told her this was bigger than a family secret, bigger than discomfort. This was about truth finally asking to be heard. And as she slipped the envelope into her bag, she didn't realize how deeply it would pull her into a story she never expected to be part of. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. That evening, as she walked back to her car, she felt a strange mix of fear and purpose, and a quiet sense that opening that letter would change more than just Daniel's life. Some letters feel heavier than paper. This was one of them. She waited until the house was quiet before opening it. The sun had already dipped low, leaving the rooms in soft shadow. She sat at the kitchen table. The envelope rested in front of her like it was watching. For a moment, she wondered if she should stop, if some truths were better left folded away. But Daniel's tired eyes came back to her. So did his question. She opened the letter. The handwriting was careful, almost formal. Each line looked like it had been written slowly, with intention. He wrote about years ago, when he was younger and certain life would turn out neatly, about loving someone deeply, but lacking the courage to fight for it. He wrote about choosing silence when honesty would have caused pain, or so he told himself at the time. The truth, he admitted, was fear. Fear of judgment, fear of disappointing his brother, fear of changing the family's balance forever. As she read, her chest tightened. This wasn't about betrayal. It wasn't about anger. It was about avoidance, and how avoidance grows sharp edges over time. Halfway through, she realized who the letter was for. Her breath caught. The person from Daniel's past wasn't distant. It wasn't abstract. It was her husband's mother. The letter explained that years ago, Daniel had discovered something important, something that could have reshaped family relationships. But instead of speaking, he stepped back. He convinced himself it wasn't his place. He watched as misunderstandings formed. as distance quietly grew between siblings, and he stayed quiet. She closed the letter and pressed her palms flat against the table. Her heart was racing. This wasn't just Daniel's story. This was her family's story, too. She thought of her husband, of how he sometimes wondered why his mother and uncle were polite but distant. She thought of holidays that felt slightly off, of conversations that never went deeper. Suddenly, it all made sense. That night, she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw two possible futures. One where the truth finally surfaced, and one where it stayed buried, heavy and unresolved. The next morning, Daniel called. He didn't ask if she read the letter. He already knew. He asked how she felt. She was honest. She said she felt torn, protective of her husband, protective of his mother. But she also said she felt compassion for him. He thanked her quietly. Then he asked if she would help him talk to her, not alone, not suddenly, but carefully, with kindness. She told him she needed time to think, time to figure out how to do this without breaking trust. He understood. Later that day, she watched her husband laugh with their children. The normalcy felt fragile. She wondered how truth could fit into a life like this without shattering it. That evening, she chose her words carefully. She didn't tell him everything, not yet. She told him Daniel was struggling, that he carried regret. Her husband listened quietly. He said his uncle had always been the type to carry things alone, to believe he had to fix everything himself. She asked how he would feel if old misunderstandings came to light, if stories he believed weren't complete. He looked thoughtful. He said truth mattered, even when it was uncomfortable. That answer stayed with her. A few days later, she met Daniel again, this time at his home. The house felt lonely, clean but untouched. He listened as she explained what the letter meant to her, how it connected to people she loved. He nodded, eyes lowered. He said he wasn't asking for forgiveness, just the chance to stop hiding. She told him honesty would hurt at first, but silence had already done its damage. They talked for hours. By the end, a plan began to form, slow, respectful. She would speak to her husband's mother first, not with accusations, not with blame, just with the truth Daniel was ready to share. As she drove home that night, the sky darkened, streetlights flickered on. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. She knew the next step would change everything. There was no undoing honesty once spoken, and she wondered if love would be enough to carry them through what came next. She chose a quiet afternoon, the kind that didn't feel rushed. Her husband's mother, Margaret, invited her in with a warm smile. The house smelled like tea and old books. They sat at the small table near the window. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains. For a few minutes, they talked about ordinary things, the children, the weather, a neighbor's new dog. But underneath it all, something waited. She wrapped her hands around her mug, steadying herself. Then she spoke. She said she wanted to talk about Daniel, about something he had carried for a long time. Margaret's smile faded slightly, not into anger, into curiosity. She listened without interrupting. As the story unfolded, Margaret's posture changed. Her shoulders stiffened, then slowly relaxed. She didn't speak when the letter was mentioned. She just nodded, eyes focused on the table. When the name Daniel came up again, Margaret exhaled, a long breath like she had been holding it for years. She said she had always felt there was more left unsaid, that some answers never arrived. She admitted there were moments she blamed herself, moments she wondered if she imagined the distance. Hearing this made her chest ache. Margaret asked one question, a simple one. Why now? She explained gently, about regret, about fear losing its grip with time. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was sadness there, but also relief. She said silence had been its own kind of hurt, a quiet one. She asked to meet Daniel, not immediately, but soon. That evening, she told her husband everything. She watched his face carefully, the surprise, the confusion. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pull away. He asked questions, thoughtful ones. He said families were complicated, that people made choices they believed were right at the time. He thanked her for trusting him with the truth. That night, she lay awake again, but this time the weight felt different. A meeting was set for the weekend. Daniel and Margaret would talk. She wasn't sure if she should be there. Part of her felt she had done enough. But both of them asked her to come. Not as a judge, as a bridge. They met in Margaret's living room, the same room filled with family photos. Daniel looked nervous, more than she had ever seen him. Margaret greeted him calmly, but her eyes told another story. They sat across from each other. Silence stretched. Then Daniel spoke. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain away his fear. He apologized. Not once, not quickly. He spoke about choosing comfort over courage, about letting years pass without fixing what he could have. Margaret listened. Tears slipped down her face, but she didn't stop him. She let every word land. When he finished, the room felt lighter and heavier. She spoke then. She said forgiveness wasn't simple, that time didn't erase pain. But she also said understanding mattered. She admitted she had carried resentment. Quietly, without knowing where it belonged. They talked for a long time. There were pauses, deep breaths. At one point, Margaret reached out. Not to forgive, just to acknowledge. That small gesture felt like hope. When it ended, no one pretended everything was fixed. But something important had shifted. Outside, the sky was turning gold. On the drive home, her husband held her hand. He said he was proud of her. She felt relief, but also uncertainty. Because truth, once spoken, keeps moving. That night, Daniel sent a message, a simple thank you. She stared at the screen, realizing something. This wasn't just about past mistakes. It was about what came next. Because healing doesn't end with a conversation. It begins there. And she wondered how these changes would ripple through the family in ways none of them could yet see. Change never arrives loudly. It slips in quietly and waits to be noticed. The days after the conversation felt strangely calm, almost too calm. Margaret called more often, not to talk about the past, just to check in. Daniel kept his distance, but not out of fear, out of respect. She watched these small shifts closely, like someone learning a new rhythm. At family dinner that week, something felt different, subtle but real. Daniel laughed more easily. Margaret didn't sit as stiffly as before. Her husband noticed it too. He squeezed her hand under the table. Later that night, he asked if she thought things would ever feel normal again. She said maybe not the old normal, but perhaps a better one. Still, not everything was smooth. Margaret invited Daniel for coffee one afternoon, just the two of them. When she heard about it, her chest tightened. She knew healing needed space, but she also knew old wounds could reopen. That evening, Daniel called. His voice sounded steady, but thoughtful. He said the conversation was hard, honest. Margaret had asked questions he didn't have easy answers for, about timing, about choices. But she also shared her own regrets, moments she wished she had asked instead of assumed. They didn't reach forgiveness, not fully, but they reached understanding. After the call ended, she sat quietly for a long time. She realized how rare it was for adults to admit they didn't know everything, to admit they were wrong. Weeks passed. Family gatherings grew warmer. Not perfect, but real. One afternoon, Margaret invited her over again, just the two of them. They sat in the same spot as before. The sunlight softer now. Margaret thanked her. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just sincerely. She said it took courage to carry truth carefully, and even more to share it. She admitted she didn't know where things with Daniel would end up, but she was glad the silence was gone. That meant more than she expected. Later that evening, her husband asked her something unexpected. He asked how she carried the weight of other people's emotions without losing herself. She didn't have a perfect answer. She said love made room, but boundaries kept it from becoming heavy. He smiled. That night, she reflected on everything. How one phone call had drawn her into a turning point. How saying yes had changed more than she imagined. She had stepped in thinking she was helping one person, but she had helped a family breathe again. Still, there was one question left.
Daniel hadn't said what he planned to do next, whether he would stay close or step back, whether facing the truth had freed him or unsettled him. A few days later, he asked to meet her one more time, not at the cafe, not at his house, at the river. As she stood watching the water move steadily forward, she wondered what he would say. Because sometimes, after truth is spoken, a new decision must be made, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what he might ask next. The river moved the way it always had, quiet, unstoppable. She arrived early and stood near the railing, watching sunlight dance on the water. It felt fitting somehow. Daniel joined her a few minutes later. He looked lighter, not happy exactly, but clearer. They stood side by side for a moment without speaking. No rush, no pressure. Then he thanked her again. Not for fixing anything, not for choosing sides, but for standing still long enough for truth to catch up. He said facing Margaret had changed him, not because everything was resolved, but because he finally stopped running from himself. He told her he planned to step back for a while, not out of guilt, out of respect. He wanted to let relationships rebuild naturally, without forcing closeness, without hiding. He said he might travel, spend time volunteering, do something that felt honest. She listened, feeling a quiet sense of peace. She told him she believed he was doing the right thing, that growth didn't always look like staying.
Sometimes it looked like giving others room. He smiled at that. Before they parted, he asked her one last question, if she regretted getting involved. She didn't hesitate. She said no. Because truth had strengthened her own marriage. Because it showed her children what courage looked like. Because silence, once broken, could never weigh the same again. They hugged briefly. Nothing dramatic. Just human. As she walked back to her car, she felt something settle inside her. At home that evening, she found her husband in the kitchen. He was making dinner, music playing softly. She told him about the river, about Daniel's plans. He nodded. Then he said something she didn't expect. He said watching her navigate everything had reminded him why he fell in love with her. Her patience, her steadiness. She smiled, eyes warm. Later that week, Margaret invited Daniel to a family dinner. Not as a test, not as a statement. Just an invitation. Daniel accepted. The dinner wasn't perfect. There were pauses, careful words. But there was laughter too. Real laughter. At one point, Margaret caught her eye from across the table and nodded. A small gesture, full of meaning. As the evening ended, she realized something important. Not every story ends with clear answers. Not every wound disappears. But honesty had given them something better than certainty. It gave them choice. Weeks later, Daniel left for his travels. He promised to stay in touch. And he did.